First thing I want to start with is Senate Bill 2285. And I'm going to call these up, try to look at them on the computer. Senate Bill 2285 is for the Mississippi Department of Employment Security. We had some fingerprinting requirements for anyone who would handle financial information that is secure. And this is a technical amendment to that request. It was simply something that we were told on the federal level we needed to tweak. So that is the purpose of the language, and I would gladly yield to any questions specifically about this. In the small packet, I apologize. We've got roughly three things in front of you. We have a packet that has the agenda, that has a series of bills, and then we have one large bill and then one small bill that was not on your agenda, 2289. But we are currently talking about 2285. And this was a technical amendment at the request of the Mississippi Department of Employment Security. I would yield for any questions. If there are no questions, a motion.
Title sufficient, do pass.
The motion is title sufficient, do pass. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? That bill will be reported out. Senate Bill 2286 is also a request from the Department of Employment Security. This is simply changing the timing for the calculation to determine the contributions that are made by employers. This is how our workforce enhancement training funds are created. The employers pay a particular tax. That is factored by your unemployment rate. So it's a moving target. It has to be calculated by the department each year. We're backing that up from a December calculation to 3 months prior to that date to September. This way, the department can let employers know a little bit more in advance if there's a change in the rate. This does not increase or decrease in any way the percentages. It simply changes the time when it is calculated to be able to provide that more timely to our employers. I would yield to any questions. If there are no questions, for a motion.
Title sufficient, do pass.
Title sufficient, do pass is the motion. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, that bill will be reported out. Senate Bill 2290 is a committee sub. 2290 is a study committee task force that addresses a one-door policy. This is something that the state of Utah has been doing since 1997 that does a lot of I guess you would say synergy within their departments when someone is seeking unemployment or seeking some type of benefits that helps communicate across their government to help offer services, education, things of that magnitude, but it just helps them to be more efficient. Interestingly enough, in 1999, the Congress didn't allow what they were doing through the WIOA monies, and the WIOA monies that we get, again, are based on the unemployment rates. It's federal monies that come in for workforce-driven issues. As I understand, this past Congress, the House passed an adjustment to allow for exceptions to apply for an exception to do this one-door type policy. The state of Louisiana is pursuing this, and the Senate did not take it up in the last Congress. So in the new Congress, the House will have to pass it again, and we expect it should pass both chambers, but it will give us an opportunity to see if we can do a better job across our agencies. And as many of you remember, the hearings that we had on labor force participation, we brought in the Department of Human Services, MDES, the Department of Rehab Services. All these entities do some great work, but often it happens more in silos and not together. So we're going to work with our partners in education, and I am not particularly firmly fixed on the participation, or excuse me, the membership of the committee. I'm going to be open to some dialogue potentially to look at that membership, but otherwise it is a task force to study this one-door policy, and under the WIOA reauthorization, that if we were allowed to apply for an exception, that we would have the information available to do that. I would yield to any questions. If there are no questions, I would ask for a motion.
Title sufficient, do pass.
Title sufficient, do pass is the motion. All in favor say aye. It's committee sub, excuse me. Title sufficient, do pass, committee sub. All in favor say aye. All those opposed, That bill will be reported out. The next bill is, will be a loan. It was not on your agenda. It's a telework bill. This is something that we have passed, I believe, out of this committee once before. We're working with the personnel board on some language, but this is basically making certain, I expect a floor sub on this bill. I'm trying to get language as we move now several years past the pandemic and our agencies, we want them to have as much flexibility as possible, but we have seen at the federal level and at the state level that there needs to be policies that govern telework or remote work while it is beneficial and technology allows for it, and we want to use that as an efficiency. We want to make sure that it's not being abused across state government. So that is the nature of that bill. I would yield to any questions. There are no questions for a motion.
Title sufficient do pass.
Title sufficient do pass is a motion. All in favor say aye. Any of those opposed? That bill reported out. The next bill is Senate Bill 2357. 2357 was a bill that was double referred to corrections and then to our committee. There was quite a bit of conversation and questions as it relates to MDOC having a relationship to contract with the Greenwood LaFleur Carroll Economic Development Foundation for a work release program. This is something that Chairman Barnett has championed over the last few years to have a work release program that was first here in Rankin County and now in some other areas. The initial numbers coming back are very impressive, that people have been able to pay their fines. They have been able to put away some funds for when they are released from custody. It's been very impressive. We had one individual that worked at a local dealership that had accumulated about $30,000 so that when he was ready to be released, he was in a position where he could put up first and last month's rent and have a car. And so these are the things that we have seen that have been beneficial. We're working with MagCorp. Of course, there's a bill that is dealing with the Prison Industries Corporation. As you are well aware, we've had that under several different names: MDOC Works, MagCorp, and MPIC. They will be involved along with MDOC, working with the Greenwood LaFleur Economic Development Foundation. The Delta Correctional Facility is in the middle, basically, of the industrial park in that area. So there are some unique opportunities for a partnership that they could do a work release program. But we passed that out of corrections. There is a question I asked there, and I spoke with Chairman Barnett before our meeting started. Rates of pay for the individuals, we want to be comparable to the work release programs that we're doing, which is paid at a rate of what is comparable if someone was hired off the street. Certainly, there are some costs that go into that, being transported, other things of that nature, but we want it to be familiar and similar to the breakdown of funds like we have seen in our successful work release program. So I do anticipate Chairman Barnett will have some language that will ensure that, as we had hearty discussion about that in the bill. And I would yield to any questions at this time on Senate Bill 2357. If there are no questions for a motion,
Title sufficient do pass.
the motion is title sufficient do pass. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, that bill will be reported out. Senate Bill 2288 addresses the Mississippi Prison Industries Act of 1990. These are code sections only that have been brought forward. This is known as MagCorp today. There's been several discussions in the utilization of how we approach workforce, and this, even though it's in corrections, and I've kind of made this point several times, Chairman Parker did a lot of work as chair of this committee that put together some wonderful tools like Accelerate, and how the SWIB board was streamlined and how we are focused on high wage, high demand, priority sector jobs. But everything in workforce has to fall underneath that workforce arm. And that's why these code sections are brought forward. The executive director at MagCorps is with us. He and I have had these conversations. We will continue to have conversations. But if there are things in the formation or the operating language of MagCorps that we need to streamline with what our focuses are, we want to be able to do that. So at this time, those are just code sections brought forward, but it is to try to make sure that we are truly addressing our economic workforce development process, whether it's in K-12, community college, or in MDOC, is flowing in the direction we need it to flow. I would yield to any questions. If there are no questions for a motion,
Title sufficient, do pass.
a motion is titled sufficient, do pass. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? That bill will be reported out. The final bill is Senate Bill 2248. It is the large stack of a bill, if you will. This bill is a committee sub, number one, and that is what is in front of you. It is actually smaller than what the original drop version was. The Fresh Start Act, as many of you are familiar, we've had several versions come through. We've passed some versions of it, including the original Fresh Start Act passed in 2019. It applied to a few occupations. This bill will pass this fresh start to many occupational license across the state of Mississippi. The language, the reason we have a committee sub, there are some groups that had voiced opinions last year that I think there had been some understanding that had come together that works for this. But what we are trying to do in Senate Bill 2248 is that someone who has a criminal record is not blocked automatically from licensure because we, I guess to each their own opinion, but we're probably over licensed in the state of Mississippi, and particular in some areas and regions. And this allows some of those very people that we may be training at our community colleges, who we may be training at the correctional institution, that when they come out, that they are not simply blocked on the front end. It prevents licensing authorities from using broad, subjective, and vague terminology, such as good character and moral turpitude, to disqualify an applicant. And it requires, specific criminal history of an applicant to be considered. Certainly, there are still opportunities for people to say, I'm not going to hire this particular person for this particular job after giving them a fair shot at that, but not just blanket disregarding anyone who may have a criminal history. Even if the conviction is directly related to the field which license is being sought, you can still issue the license, again, that board that makes that licensure decision, if the offense was committed at some period of time that they feel is appropriate, or there's a verifiable track record that indicates that, they are able to move forward. That judgment continues to be at the discretion of each board, and it allows an applicant for a license to receive a determination on whether they would be disqualified. So it would be kind of a tough situation if somebody says, I want to go out and obtain this particular licensure and to do. That's one way. When you say they talked a bill to death, I may have just done that. But that's before someone goes out and invests to get that certification and to pay money and their time to get that training, that they could get a decision beforehand if they were going to be disqualified from that license. Of course, as we all know in this committee, our labor force participation rate is one of the lowest in the country, and this would give an opportunity for people to have legitimate careers with licensure, with safeguards in place that would prevent the public from being harmed. That is a brief explanation of the bill. I would yield to any questions. Yes, sir. That is correct. Right. Yes, Senator Parker.
So I just want to be sure here. So because I know last year we had a bill that opened up basically all of the occupational licensure boards, and at the last minute I found out something that had a concern about, and we weren't able to make an adjustment there. What my concern on this, are there any occupational licensure boards that are excluded from this? In particular, is the Bar Association in this? Is medical licensure in here? Who and why are any groups excluded from?
Sure, there are, I do not have a list in front of me of who is excluded. I will be glad to bring that to you. I think some of them you just named are excluded. Realtors, I think, are excluded in some fashion. I guess the best way I can present that is when the bill was dropped last year, there were organizations that came forward and said, there's an issue that we have with this, and they have negotiated this position. So I don't think there's anyone, to my knowledge, that raised a major issue last year that has not been considered and
Right.
addressed.
And I doubt this has the issue. Last year, the issue was where we were, in your bill, where we were looking at the terms and we were looking at, and again, haven't thought about that since the last day of last session. But one concern on this is that, in particular licensure, there's some people who certainly they're going to get training during their incarceration, and they'll move and improve themselves. But you may have someone who, for example, I would just mention, so in the practice of dentistry, there's not going to be any ability to become a dentist during in the prison system, and so I just wonder if you, by including some of those licensure boards in there, if you had someone who maybe was guilty of a felony of inappropriate touching of a child, for example, are we not, by doing this, maybe putting our licensure boards in a position where they might have to accept someone back into a profession for an act that they then would possibly be put into a position where they could, create the same offense again? Again, I haven't looked at this or thought about it, but I'd like to give some consideration to that, because we may indeed have in professions who are, going back into a field where something like that could be the case, something that we want to be just very careful on. And again, I don't have a suggestion or an amendment or anything at this time, but I just would like to work with you to see, if we can have that ironed out on the front end instead of, at the end, kind of wishing we had done something with it.
Certainly, and I'll be glad to provide a list too of who's in, who's out, who we're dealing with. But I think the intent, and certainly we'll make sure the language matches the intent, is to avoid what you just described, is that someone who does not need to be licensed, ultimately it's still up to that licensure board to license them. We're just trying to avoid, number one, blanket refusal to issue a license from many of the licensing authorities that probably shouldn't do that, based on the scenario. And then also certainly to have to give a pre-clearance somewhat, if you will, to a person before they go and invest in the education to get the licensure, and then they tell them on the backside, you're not eligible. But I will be glad to work with you on this bill.
And in that example, it would be, I would think, quite rare for, I think in that situation, you would probably have someone who has had their license suspended in addition to the incarceration. And there might be some need for reinstatement of licensure to have maybe a different qualifier on it than new licensure. Again, we can give that some thought as it moves along.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? If there are no other questions for a motion,
Pass committee sub.
motion is titled Sufficient Due Pass Committee Sub. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? That bill reported out. Thank you. And one more motion. Rise and report. Thank you.